One of the difficult things about having a Q&A session live is that I never know what questions anyone is going to ask. Now, I'm about to show you one such Q&A session from the other night. And I guess we'll just call this an announcement. I'm bringing Sarah on, not my wife Sarah, but another Sarah, on each week, and she will be asking questions at the end of my presentations that people are asking while I'm speaking live. I obviously cannot read all the questions going on in the comments section, and so she writes them down and she will ask them afterwards. And this one in particular, I was not expecting. This came by way of John Q, and he asked me about Osama bin Laden. Now, this just so happens to be something that I have researched and I have a paper on. You could read it for yourself. Actually, I'm going to link it at the bottom of this video. What you're going to see me do is I'm going to try to convey a concept, a truth. Unfortunately, I give a couple wrong facts. Let me explain really quickly. Osama bin Laden died, by all indications, he died in 2001. Unfortunately, I said that he died in the whereabouts of 9/11, before 9/11, and that by the time the 9/11 attacks had already occurred, that he was dead. That's actually not true. All reports indicate, and I'm talking newspaper reports, indicate that he died by December 2001, which is a problem for the official narrative because you go all the way to 2011, I believe it was, when he was assassinated by the squad. That's a 10-year difference. And again, I think I said in the video, it was like 2009, 2010. This is me attempting to recall facts from my research on the spot, on air, and I don't get everything right. But what I did get correct was that Osama bin Laden, the whole 2011 death scenario where he was buried at sea, it was all fake. It was fiction. It never happens. And in fact, I think it was 2002 was when we got the first footage of Osama bin Laden, and it was an actor. I mean, it was so pointedly bad. This Osama bin Laden double. It didn't even look like him. It was so bad that if you go like Google today, Osama bin Laden videos, I don't even know if that comes up in the search results. Like Google doesn't even want to show it. That's an embarrassing blip on the record, and I think like Time Magazine was showing it. It was so embarrassing. Anyways, here it is for yourself, and I will encourage you in the future weeks, come to our live broadcast, and particularly on Sabbath, and you could ask me the hard questions and watch me squirm trying to answer them.
Okay, that's fascinating. That's something I think we could definitely talk about for a long time. And I love it when people bring up those questions because I have the same questions. Okay, John Hugh Adams was talking about, let's see, he said, so was the U.S. Navy keeping Torah when they buried Osama bin Laden at sea shortly after he was put to death? And then he said, well, even though it might not have been a conscious decision, he says it's interesting that Muslims have the same tradition as Jews. And is 24 hours just for a death and before sundown the law? Or if one was put to death, is it different?
I see John Q wrote there in the comments, he said, I brought this on myself. And I know that he threw that just out there to make this really difficult, which that's a really good question. First of all, I would ask the viewer to question whether Osama bin Laden was really killed in that raid. Maybe he was. I don't have a problem thinking he was, just because, well, I do. He was a CIA guy. I have written a paper on this that Osama bin Laden probably died before September 11th. All right. I think he was reported dead by the summer of 2001, and they had to really cover that up because they're like, oh crap, the guy that we are using as the patsy in this attack, he just died, and it was being reported. They had to cover that up and push it through, and the whole ridiculous story that they carried on to, when was he killed? 2009 or 10, or in the whereabouts there, officially, that he had been dead by a decade by that point. So that being said, was his burial Torah? No, it wasn't, because They didn't bury him. I don't know how he was buried. But the point of the Islam or the Muslims and the Quran and its connection to some Torah-based issues, a lot of people, I almost don't know if I should say this just to protect the author, but one of my first writing project that I ever did was working as a ghostwriter for a former Muslim who was writing to people in the Middle East, trying to convince them that Yahushua HaMashiach or Yahushua is Messiah. And he used the Quran to do it. And so my first introduction to the Quran was through a guy who was actually using the Quran to convince them that the Bible's legit, which is interesting because the typical Christian idea is that we're to slam and say the Quran is evil and all this kind of stuff, as if that's really going to win converts. That's going to wake them up. Like, oh yeah, you're right. Our Quran is evil. And people will point out some of the same passages in there, like how Elohim is going to come and kill all the pagans, and they're like, see that? It's like, well, wait a second. Actually, the Bible says the same thing. So that there's going to be fire raining down, and he's coming and to slay the bad guys. Well, so one of the things that he talked about was that he believed that Muhammad, now again, was Muhammad a Roman spook? Was he working with St. Augustine? People have these questions. But one of the ideas is that Muhammad was, this is really fascinating. Okay, so let me back up. So you have Christianity, according to the official narrative, and I would back this up. You have the crescent shape of the Mesopotamian region around the Mediterranean. So you think of Israel, Egypt, over to Ethiopia, and then you've got going through Turkey over to Rome and Spain. That's where Christianity was. And so if you were a bishop, if you were in the church, you would be positioned there. By the time Muhammad came along, the church was well established. All right. Now this is going according to official history. And if you were kicked out of the church for theology that did not agree with Rome, you were kicked out of that crescent and you were put into places like Saudi Arabia, the desert. You were trying to survive out there. These are the people that went to Muhammad, or I should say Muhammad went to. He went and asked these people questions. And according to this author that I was working with, his opinion was that Muhammad was seeking the truth. He was actually seeking the truth, but he spoke to all the wrong people because he was also on the outside of Christianity. Just throw that out there. I've never spoken on that before. I cannot comment on the similarities between the Torah and the Quran, though I figure they would have many similar justice scenarios. I can't comment on it because I haven't done a study on that. But thank you, John Q, for asking me an almost impossible question. I tried to weasel my way out of that the best I could.
Is it, is it even acceptable in the Torah to be buried at sea?
That's a good question. I'd have to look. Does it? That's a good question. I mean, if you're at sea and you die and you're supposed to be buried within 24 hours, I don't know. Is it permissible to carry that? That's a whole moral debate. I don't know. That's something maybe this room, you guys can hash out in the Torah talk room this week, because I don't know. That's a good. I mean, when we talk about the Torah, right, you guys know my view on the Torah. Hopefully, one that is developing much more is that the Torah is a transformative document. Okay, it's when people come over and they say they're Torah observants or they're Torah pursuant, as I claim to be, it attracts a lot of very zealous people, as I myself am. And that makes sense. Zealous people want to be obedient, whereas non-zealous people are like, yeah, I don't really like this obedience thing. That must be a false doctrine, that kind of stuff. Because I got grace, right? So you want to be zealous, you want to be obedient. And so you see the Torah as all these check marks, right? I got to check mark this, and this. And if I do these things, then I'm obeying the Torah and I'm good to go. Well, you see that this was one of the big problems in going through like Isaiah and stuff, where Yah's like, I'm sick of your feasts, I'm sick of your all this stuff, and I wish you would just stop it all, because they were just checking off the boxes and they didn't have a circumcised heart. So the Torah done right is what I would call a gnosis.
All right. Gnosis is a scary word for a lot of people. Gnosis is something that you can explain to someone, but you can't really explain it. You can only experience it, right? You can try to explain to someone what having a circumcised heart looks like, but you can't really know it unless if you feel it. That's the only way. It's the same thing as like for those of you who are parents and you held your baby in your arms for that first time, and someone could try to explain to you what it's like being a parent. But until that moment, when you're holding your own flesh and blood in your hand, it's this little tiny thing, and you're like, oh my goodness, like that's gnosis. That's something you have to experience, right? That's what the Torah is. All right. Now there's a point to all this. It's a transformative book. So people will go into this and they go, oh, look, I can marry multiple wives now, and I can own slaves, and I can do all this stuff. But if you're reading the Torah correctly, the question should be, just because you can, does that mean you should? All right. Who is always saying, why do you want to go back to slavery to Egypt? He's allowing you to be a slave. You can get your ear up to a door and get it nailed in, and you could be a slave for the rest of your life. But if you're reading Torah, you're like, if it's a transformative document, you're like, why would you want that? Right? That's the whole question. It's like there's something wrong with you if you want to be a slave for the rest of your life. It gives you permission to do it if that's what you want. So that's when we're reading. My big thing is when we're reading all these commands. All right, please don't read me wrong. Yes, keep the feast, keep Sabbath, right? But when we're going through all these check marks of like, oh, should we? Oh, we're at sea, and oh no, we got to bury someone. It's like really like what is the heart of the matter here? What are we trying? We're trying to live a life, a certain life by a standard code to worship the Most High, and checking off the boxes does not mean that we have a circumcised heart. Okay, that's my conclusion. That's where I'm at. So awesome question, guys. Yeah. And by the way, John Q is going to get his. Next time I'm going to ask him the hard questions. So.